The Swiss Connection Science Podcast is back with brand new stories. They're all connected by one overarching theme: the climate challenges we face today and the smart solutions that can help us tackle them. This season we're diving into the depths of Swiss lakes, where invasive mussels are threatening the delicate indigenous ecosystem. We'll also travel to the Arctic to discover how ancient ice can reveal vital clues for pioneering climate research. And we'll explore the critical world of the semiconductor industry, looking at its global importance and Switzerland's potential role within it. All this and more is coming soon in the new season of the Swiss Connection Science Podcast. Swissinfo Podcasts.
This is Inside Geneva. I'm your host, Imogen Folks, and this is a production from Swissinfo, the international public media company of Switzerland. In today's programme.
And this is what they're finding here.
We have at least one casualty every single day in Afghanistan that's killed or injured. And that casualty is most likely to be a child.
Since Russia's full-scale invasion began, Ukraine has become one of the most mined countries in the world.
Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, and the fact that at the moment there are billions of square metres of land that are suspected of being contaminated, that means that land can't be farmed.
This is proliferating well beyond Ukraine. Ukraine and Russia are the two leaders in drone technology, but the level of proliferation is scary.
Anti-personnel mines could soon be buried here in Poland. On Tuesday, Poland and the Baltic states announced their intention to withdraw from the Ottawa Convention, which bans the use of these weapons.
We did not say yes to landmines. We said no to unilateral disarmament constructs.
We heard that Lebanon will be joining the convention. This is a massive achievement, and this is a massive push to the convention itself.
Hello and welcome again to Inside Geneva. I'm Imogen Folks. Now, regular listeners will know that from time to time we devote a whole podcast to treaties that changed the world. We've talked about the Convention Against Torture, the Convention on Enforced Disappearances, and in our very first podcast like this, we looked at the Ottawa Convention on Landmines. Adopted in 1997, it is credited with saving tens of thousands of lives. More than 2 decades later, here's a little reminder of what people told me about it.
We'd had 2 weeks of very intense negotiations. We were never sure if we were going to get to a successful conclusion or not. And when they brought down that gavel in Oslo in September of 1997, that was the most special moment of my life.
We were sitting in our little old dining room in Phnom Penh, and suddenly the news came on the BBC. And we started shrieking and yelling, and everybody was hopping around or riding around in their wheelchairs, just shouting for joy.
Personally, I was so happy. The world had decided that the landmines were bad, had to be banned. So that was an incredible moment. So, I was so happy.
Campaigners, doctors and landmine survivors were euphoric when the convention was agreed, and they've defended it ever since. More than 160 countries have signed up, though not the big powers like the US, Russia and China. And in the last couple of years, countries such as Poland, Estonia or Finland, especially exposed to possible Russian aggression, have said they will leave the treaty. What might that mean for warfare and for those working to clean up mines and other weapons once a conflict has ended? Here at the UN in Geneva, the International Conference on Mine Action has been taking place. I went along to talk to the experts there.
My name's Nick Pond. I'm the chief of the Mine Action Section in UNAMA, which is the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan.
I'm Sean Moorhouse. I work for the United Nations Development Programme as a technical advisor in the Mine Action team.
I'm Rana. I'm working at the Geneva International Center for Humanitarian Demining, supporting states that are affected by the explosive ordnance, which includes a wide range of items.
My name's Paul Heslop, and I am the senior advisor to the head of the UN in Ukraine on mine action, so everything to do with landmines and bomb disposal.
We're on a mission, following a demining squad in southern Ukraine.
Paul Heslop has decades of experience in mine clearance. Now he's working in Ukraine. Some of the weapons may be new, but those most at risk have stayed the same.
Probably the most at-risk group, other than the military, are teenage boys who have a tendency to fiddle. They've heard the messaging before again and again. We've just had a project where we've helped the state emergency services by donating virtual reality goggles. And so those virtual reality goggles, they go to schools, high schools, and the kids put them on and they're put through a variety of scenarios in a virtual world to show them how to avoid risk. Now, a teenage boy being shown a short video or a poster, perhaps not so interested. Get the virtual reality goggles on and suddenly you've got a degree of excitement.
And Paul adds, while he's trying to stop Ukrainian children being killed by landmines, just the fact the mines are there at all impacts the entire planet.
Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, and the fact that at the moment there are billions of square meters of land that are suspected of being contaminated, that means that land can't be farmed. That absence of productivity is affecting global food prices. So it's not just affecting Ukraine's economy, it's affecting every person in the world. You're paying more for your bread, more for your pasta, more for your fuel because of the actual and the perceived mine contamination problem in Ukraine.
Afghanistan has one of the highest concentrations of landmines in the world.
3 months ago, 13-year-old Norzia stepped on a landmine while collecting firewood. Today, she's walking on new artificial legs.
And while Paul is working in a relatively new conflict, Nick Pond is working in Afghanistan, once called the Forever War. Those who fought for decades over the country have left a lethal legacy that will take years to clear.
We've got the third highest casualty rate in the world in Afghanistan, behind Myanmar and Syria. We have at least one casualty every single day in Afghanistan that's killed or injured. And that casualty is most likely to be a child. Over 70% of the casualties are children. So with this old program that we've had, an experienced program that we have, we've got a great opportunity to clear Afghanistan of contamination. So yes, trying to prevent these casualties, mostly kids, mostly boys, playing with things they find while they're tending sheep or their goats in the hills. They'll pick something up and either play with it or put it in the fire or take it home, even worse. Last year in Farah, somebody took something into a house and killed 7 members of the family. So, yeah, that's my focus really, is we've got an incredibly high casualty rate and we've got an opportunity to lower that casualty rate. So that's what it feels like more than clearance.
There's no peace in Lebanon. A ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel came into effect in November, but the remnants of war keep killing.
Lebanon has around 17.5 million square metres of land covered in landmines.
Like Nick, Rana Elias of the Geneva Center for Humanitarian Demining is working in a region where weapons contamination has been a problem for decades. Her native Lebanon.
It's rather grim, I would say, grim outlook. And sometimes, I guess, we probably all as a sector, we feel this is impossible. Take Lebanon again. 2006, the conflict, there were massive efforts into clearing cluster munition, and now it's all over again in terms of destruction, in terms of recovery. But I think we have to maintain hope, and we have to persist in our work as a whole community. As a whole mine action community per se. It may seem impossible the challenges are so immense, not only in terms of the scale, in terms of the lack of funding, but also in terms of the civilian harm that has been inflicted, in terms of children being killed or maimed. Take Syria, as you say. Syria, just from the fall of the previous regime, from December 2024 up until recently, these are, I would say, more than 2,000 injuries, civilian, including a high number of children, mostly in rural and agricultural areas, just to give an idea about the scale also in Syria.
This is one of tens of thousands of potential time bombs lying in Ukraine.
That is the view from the Russian drone.
As I said at the start, this conference is about mines, and let's remember, the Ottawa Convention deals with only one kind of mine, the anti-personnel landmine. But in fact, the experts here are discussing all sorts of weapons. Warfare is changing, weapons are becoming more autonomous, but some things all weapons have in common: they're not always reliable, and they can lie around unexploded for years after a conflict has ended. Sean Moorhouse is a mine specialist with the UN Development Programme. He told me what he'd seen in Ukraine.
We have weaponized drones. There's a massive variety of different types of drones. Everyone thinks about drones as flying, unmanned aerial vehicles, but we have ground drones, we have unmanned surface vessels, ships, we have underwater, and all of them can be used to deliver explosives.
So what is it then that concerns you in relation to these weapons that brings you to this particular conference?
Well, I think particularly when we take into account the UAVs, what we're seeing is a democratization of the skies in a way. Previously, only states had access to sort of aircraft and that sort of thing. And now anybody can pick up a hobby drone, put a warhead on it, an explosive warhead on it, and fly it into a target. So anybody can attack almost any target.
So if we talk about international law, and one of the reasons, say, the Landmine Convention was brought in was the concept of no discrimination, lack of discrimination. Is that your concern with drones as well?
Yes. Ukraine produced 2.5 million FPV, first-person view drones last year, and 70% of them failed to go off, which means we now have 1.75 million unexploded drones just from the Ukrainian side. So they are a hazard in themselves, just like any other form of explosive ordnances.
So that's going to be a massive cleanup operation as well, as with landmines. And there, I suppose, then the skills become similar, the teams become similar.
They do, but the improvised nature of drones means that each one is assembled slightly differently, and that requires a higher level of training to deal with. So it takes longer to train people to deal with this threat. It's a new threat, and we actually need to develop the training that's appropriate.
Meanwhile, these things are being used, failing, landing. The cleanup job, I mean, you must have seen quite a few, what it takes to decontaminate land. It's going to be huge in Ukraine.
It's an absolutely massive problem. And in addition, because so many drones were being jammed, they started using fiber optic cables to control them, which stops them being jammed. But that leaves just an absolutely horrific number of fiber optic cables, which go for 60 kilometers now, littering the landscape, so much so people can't walk across fields, farmers can't farm their fields. We can't do the demining because we can't get through these cables. It's incredible.
At the same time, funding for demining is being reduced.
Yes, we are struggling to get anything near the resources we need. And I'm talking about drones. I'm not talking necessarily about drones in Ukraine. And between January and March this year, 38 countries actually had a weaponized drone attack. So this is proliferating well beyond Ukraine. Ukraine and Russia are the two leaders in drone technology, driven by war, as you know, is somewhat inevitable in human history. But the level of proliferation is scary.
But while those like Sean, Nick, Paul or Rana, who specialise in weapons decontamination, worry about proliferation and yet more decades of cleanup, some countries, as we said at the beginning, are leaving the Ottawa Convention, and it's only right to hear their reasons.
My name is Jonathan Vseviov. I'm the Secretary General of the Estonian Foreign Ministry.
Jonathan Vseviov is number 2 at Estonia's Foreign Ministry, and he wants the world to understand why his country has taken the difficult decision to leave the Ottawa Convention.
We did not say yes to landmines. We said no to unilateral disarmament constructs. In the context of Russia's ongoing war of aggression in Ukraine, the goal of which has not changed and is not limited to eastern Ukraine or even all of Ukraine, which Putin wants to subjugate, to recreate his empire. It's not just Ukraine's fate that will be decided in Ukraine, it's also Europe's. Because this idea of empire that Putin pursues, this root cause to this war, which is his inability to accept that the Soviet Union collapsed, is going to shape Europe, not just in the eastern part of the continent, but the idea of Europe, because the idea of empire and the idea of Europe that we've been pursuing just simply don't fit in the same space and time. So this is the reality that's out there. We are as opposed to landmines as anybody else. We know the cost of these weapon systems. We also know that, God forbid, if military force were to be used against us, those weapon systems would be used against us because the Russians don't adhere to these limitations. So we are confident in our ability to defend Estonia. We are confident in assessing that currently there is no acute military danger on our borders, partly because, frankly, the Russians are all stuck in Ukraine. But then again, we are fully awake to the enormous challenge that Russia presents, not to us, but to all of Europe, and are not going to entertain unilateral limits to our ability to defend freedom in Estonia.
Okay, so you said that unilateral disarmament is a strategy you don't really subscribe to. But on a practical level, would landmines actually help your security? Because some people dispute that.
So the last time I checked with our defense specialist, with my colleagues over at the Ministry of Defense or the Defense Forces, they had no plans for acquiring landmines, no plans for using landmines for the defense of Estonia. So I trust the military experts, the expertise that's housed within our defense structures. And as of right now, there is the answer to your question is affirmative. We agree. There is no utility at this stage for those weapon systems. It might change tomorrow or in a week's time, and then we'll let the world know. But as of now, there are no plans on actually using the weapons.
Just broadening, also maybe a little bit outside of Estonia, one of the things that the people who work in demining, and it's far broader now than anti-personnel landmines, is the massive cleanup operation that's going to be needed in Ukraine because of unexploded ordnance, these tails from drones who are trying to avoid the radar, that there's thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of land that can't be cultivated.
Indeed. So when we think about this war, we oftentimes seem to make the mistake of assuming that once the war ends, the problems disappear. It's not going to be the case. You're absolutely right. So even in the best case scenario of us succeeding, let's say today, in pushing Russia to reassess their strategy vis-a-vis Ukraine and vis-a-vis Europe, and pull itself back to within its international recognized borders, which is the ultimate goal of our policy, nothing more, but nothing less, then Ukraine will require enormous assistance from international partners in terms of cleaning up, but also in terms of providing a framework for security, for economic development, reconstruction, and stabilizing their democracy. In many ways, it's going to be similar to what Western Europe faced after the end of the Second World War.
The United Nations has sounded the alarm as landmine deaths rise amid funding cuts to demining programs.
But who is ready to fund a Marshall Plan these days? In fact, money for mine clearance, like other humanitarian operations, is being cut back. Nick Pond's experience in Afghanistan is a lesson in how challenging and how long-term the work can be.
It is a bit of a Sisyphean task at times, particularly at the moment. There's a conflict ongoing with Pakistan, which has potentially recontaminated 39 districts along the border. And now we're trying to find money and get access for teams to go out to check those districts which have recently been contaminated. So it is frustrating, especially when we see some of the casualties, statistics and stories coming in on such a regular basis.
What's your thinking? I mean, I know you're also former military, that warfare is changing. We've got a lot of new technology, and a lot of the people that I've talked to today have raised the issue of drones posing very similar ethical problems, which led to the ban on anti-personnel landmines. Do you see that maybe you clear the mines, but then there's going to be a whole new... I mean, we have the most advanced militaries in the world racing to get this technology.
Well, what's interesting in Afghanistan and depressing at the same time is 90% of the casualties in Afghanistan are from explosive remnants of war. So the issue we have is stuff that's lying around, either things that have been fired and haven't exploded, stuff people have buried when they closed down barracks, or stuff that's just been discarded and lost. We had an incident in November last year when a family came across the border from Pakistan to an informal transit centre in Kabul. And because they arrived late at night, the transit centre was closed. So they moved across to a patch of ground in Kabul, surrounded by houses, a place where people play cricket all the time, but it happens to be a former Soviet military barracks that was knocked down decades ago. They built a fire to keep warm, it was November, and unbeknown to them, there was a rocket fuse underneath the ground, under the bush they were burning. It detonated and 7 children ended up in hospital. So it's that sort of contamination that we have an issue with in Afghanistan at the moment. 90% of the casualties are from incidents like that. So we don't suffer from the technology of drones at the moment and their impact, because it's not really, there is a little bit involved in the current conflict, but not massively really. We're on traditional artillery shelling. Our contamination is really legacy contamination, but exactly the same problems apply in that munitions don't always detonate, they certainly don't always land where intended, and they are there for years and years and years to come following the conflict.
So although we still have a convention against anti-personnel landmines, and we have a convention on explosive remnants of war, which requires parties to a conflict to clean up leftover weapons, there are still vast quantities of unexploded ordnance from Afghanistan to Ukraine, Syria, Myanmar, Bosnia, Cambodia, Laos, Lebanon, Iraq, and many other places. Paul Heslop would like us to think differently, not about particular weapons in isolation, but what they and those who use them and produce them actually do.
Is it easy to argue that, mass-produced anti-personnel mines are one thing, but, again, we saw, particularly in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Mali, the use of pressure plate IEDs function very much the same as an anti-personnel mine, victim-operated. So, unfortunately, they've caused a lot of casualties. And again, in an asymmetric environment, that's a challenge. When it comes to, again, I think you mentioned drones, I think all of these weapon systems, there are 2 parts to it. Is the weapon system being deployed in a combat situation against a legitimate target? And if that is the case, then whether you're using artillery, direct fire, cluster munitions, even remotely deployed explosive devices, and they're against a military target within the rules of war, that is one thing. And if their use is properly documented, the weather conditions, the soil conditions, the wind, and the number of munitions used, the target area, all of that is recorded, then making the cleanup afterwards is relatively straightforward. It just becomes a technical exercise. Where the problems come about is none of that data is gathered, but more importantly is either the weapon system is being used indiscriminately against civilian targets, particularly in urban areas. That is a serious problem. And that is something we're starting to see now as drones in Ukraine have a bigger and bigger payload and a longer and longer range. We're now seeing civilian communities in the west of Ukraine being targeted. Is that a 30 to 50 kilo warhead, or is that as a carrier device carrying submunitions that are then indiscriminately scattered over an area. And then those items that are scattered, do they explode on impact? Is there a time delay, or is there a victim-operated mechanism? All of those fall under treaties. And again, if they're being used in an indiscriminate way on civilian targets, it's a war crime. So, is the weapon being used correctly? How is it that we can have weapon systems where 10% is considered a good fail rate? And, in some cases, we're seeing some of the North Korean artillery have a 40% fail rate. So if you're firing 1,000 shells a day, that's 400 unexploded bombs. After 1,500 days, that's 6 million unexploded bombs. Because of the just lying around, because they were not manufactured to the same tolerances that we expect from a fridge or a Toyota. So, we've got these incredibly complex, incredibly expensive weapon systems that fail to function as designed. Now, if that is fired at a target that is a military target and it functions, it's not a problem because it's gone bang. If it hasn't gone bang, the military target goes off, the conflict comes to an end, kids come to that area, start playing with it, it's suddenly become an indiscriminate weapon. So, why are we not either expecting the weapons manufacturers to build the weapons to a higher quality with better tolerances, or they have to pay a fee for clearing them up? If an oil tanker spills oil through incompetence, the oil company pays for the cleanup. Why do we not see the weapons manufacturers paying for the cleanup of their weapon systems that were legitimately used against a military target, but then failed and then became an indiscriminate tool?
And Sean Moorhouse, too, believes our laws are playing catch-up.
The Ottawa Convention just applies to anti-personnel mines, so it's quite specific. However, drones will drop anti-personnel mines. They drop 3D printed mines, or they drop old Soviet stocks of what we call the butterfly mine. And they can now deliver them anywhere. So you can have a cargo drone go and lay a minefield overnight in a place where you would never expect to find a minefield. So there's a technical problem in finding those and clearing them. We have conventions. There's the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, which would cover items laid by drones that we would classify as sort of improvised explosive devices, or that they function like an anti-personnel mine would. So the conventions are there that covers the drone stuff mostly, but when it comes to AI targeting, we completely lack, actually, the laws to deal with that. If you have a human in the kill chain, that would be too slow. If you're up against an opponent who does not have the same ethical considerations and does not have a human in the kill chain. So it is a really, really big problem.
Are governments listening to the concerns of people like yourself?
To be honest, we have only just started raising these concerns, quite frankly.
And do you think we're in the right frame of mind globally to deal with it right now?
Yes, I do. I think it has taken a number of years for the West to wake up to the fact that drones have revolutionized warfare, but also that they need to deal with them in some way. So I do think states are starting to address the issue now and take it much more seriously than just a year or two ago.
All these concerns add up, for Paul Heslop at least, to a pretty pessimistic take on where we are.
Honestly, if you'd said to me 5 years ago you'll be working in Ukraine, having never worked outside the Balkans in a European country before, if you told me that there would be a war in Iran 5 years ago, I would not have believed that possible. I mean, I've spent over 30 years in this sector, and for 25 years we were really winning the battle. We were clearing way more mines and way more explosive devices than were being used. And in the last 5 years we have seen that reversed catastrophically, and it is going to cost many millions, if not billions of dollars to clean up the mess that has been made in the last 5 years.
These are points Estonia's Jonathan Vseviov hears loud and clear. His country's departure from the Landmine Convention may only be temporary, and so far there are no plans to use landmines. Meanwhile, his government remains committed to supporting Ukraine, and that includes a cleanup of weapons.
Cleanup of ordnance is part of this story. Reconstructing Ukraine is another part of the story. Providing for security, another part of the story. And most importantly, bearing in mind that in big political, strategic developments like the one that we're discussing here. Hope is amongst the most valuable of resources. Hope today during war keeps the Ukrainians afloat. Hope once war is over, hope that they can one day live a normal European life is going to be at least as important. If we, as Europe, want to play a strategic role in shaping our own future, then we need to be the ones who become comfortable again with concepts like providing hope, defining the future, taking a claim in the sort of future our own continent has.
And here at Inside Geneva, we like to provide some hope too. So we'll leave you with the news that during that mine conference, we heard that while some countries are leaving, Lebanon will be joining the Ottawa Treaty. For Rana, that's a huge and positive step by her home country.
We heard that Lebanon will be joining the convention. This is a massive achievement, and this is a massive push to the convention itself. And that's why, in a way, we should perhaps maybe twist the narrative a bit. Because when we speak a lot that the convention is under pressure, I think, hasn't it always been under pressure? I think also the way we are framing things, we should try to work on a more positive narrative, counter-argue in a way why we need IHL, why we need these norms, why we need protection of civilians. And it's actually more costly, Imagine how much money and time, and in addition to, of course, the civilian harm inflicted, how much these conflicts are costing. We should invest in education, we should invest in health, we should invest in other sectors, and exactly, we should invest in lobbying and advocating for more states to join the convention. It is under pressure, but I think, it's a success story that Lebanon is joining, and these are the narratives that we should build our stories also around and make sure these are celebrated.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of Inside Geneva. My thanks to everyone who took part and to you for listening. A reminder, you've been listening to Inside Geneva, a SwissInfo production. You can subscribe to us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our previous episodes, how the International Red Cross unites prisoners of war with their families, or why survivors of human rights violations turn to the UN in Geneva for justice. I'm Imogen Folks. Thanks again for listening.